welcome to the room of requirement. Today I'm going to be taking a little bit of a deep dive into alchemy and explaining what it really is and how it pertains to the great work and any kind of spiritual practice. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the study of alchemy, the science of transformation. So what is alchemy? Most people hear the word alchemy and immediately think of turning lead into gold. While this idea certainly exists within the alchemical tradition, it represents only the outermost layer of a much deeper system. For thousands of years, alchemy served as a philosophy, a spiritual path, a science, a symbolic language, and a method of personal transformation. It has influenced medicine, chemistry, mysticism, Hermetic philosophy, Rosicrucianism, ceremonial magic, psychology, and countless spiritual traditions. And at its deepest level, alchemy seeks to answer many of the same questions found in Kabbalah. What is the nature of reality? How does transformation occur? Why do human beings suffer? How can souls be purified? How can the fragmented self be restored to wholeness? The alchemists believed that all of creation was engaged in an ongoing process of evolution and refinement. Just as metals develop within the earth, the human soul also undergoes a process of growth, purification, and transformation. The true goal of alchemy was never simply to create physical gold. The true goal was to transform the lead of the ordinary self into the gold of spiritual realization. The origins of alchemy stretch back thousands of years and emerge from several different cultures. Egyptian, Greek, Persian, Babylonian, Jewish, Islamic, and later European traditions all contributed to what eventually became Western alchemy. Many scholars trace the origins of alchemy to ancient Egypt, particularly the city of Alexandria, where Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and later Christian ideas mingled together. In fact, some believe the word alchemy itself derives from Chem or Kemet, the ancient Egyptian name for Egypt, often translated as the Black Land. This was because the soil around the Nile itself used to be a dark black color because it was so rich with nutrients. Within Alexandria emerged one of the most influential figures in alchemical history, Hermes Trismegistus. Although likely a legendary composite figure, Hermes became associated with divine wisdom and the teachings that would later become known as Hermeticism. Alchemy is inseparable from Hermetic philosophy. One of the foundational Hermetic principles states, "As above, so below, as within, so without." This simple statement forms the basis for all alchemical thought. The alchemists believe that the universe and the human being mirror one another. The transformations occurring within nature also occur within consciousness. The refinement of metals mirrors the refinement of the soul, and the laboratory becomes a symbolic representation of the inner spiritual process. And for this reason, alchemy was never merely chemistry, it was a spiritual science. One of the most important texts in alchemical history is the Emerald Tablet, traditionally attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. Though extremely short, the Emerald Tablet became one of the most influential documents in Western esotericism. It describes the unity of creation, the relationship between heaven and earth, and the process by which transformation occurs. For centuries, alchemists viewed the Emerald Tablet as a key to understanding both the universe and the soul. Many considered it to be the foundation upon which all entire alchemical traditions rested. Perhaps no symbol is more famous in alchemy than the philosopher's stone. To the uninitiated, the philosopher's stone appears to be a magical substance capable of transforming lead into gold. But for the alchemist, however, the philosopher's stone represents perfection. It symbolizes spiritual completion. It represents enlightenment and the perfected soul. The philosopher's stone is the final product of the great work. The great work, known as the magnum opus, is the central objective of alchemy. It refers to the process through which the fragmented self is purified, transformed, and reunited with its divine nature. The great work is one of the most important concepts within all Western esotericism. Just as Kabbalah describes the soul's ascent through the tree of life, alchemy describes the soul's transformation through a series of stages. The alchemists believe that human beings begin in a state of fragmentation, confusion, and unconsciousness. Through discipline, self-observation, purification, and transformation, the individual gradually awakens to a higher state of being. The great work is therefore not something performed upon matter, it is something performed upon consciousness itself. Much like the tree of life, alchemy functions as a map of consciousness. The various alchemical symbols, stages, and processes represent states of awareness and phases of spiritual development. The alchemist studies nature because nature reveals universal laws. The alchemist studies matter because matter reflects consciousness. And the alchemist studies transformation because transformation is the fundamental principle governing both the universe and the soul. And for this reason, many modern students view alchemy as one of the earliest systems of spiritual psychology ever developed. One of the most important teachings in alchemy concerns the three philosophical principles. These principles are not physical substances, but symbolic forces that exist within both nature and consciousness. Mercury represents spirit, consciousness, fluidity, intuition, adaptability, and transformation. Sulfur represents the soul, passion, will, individuality, desire, and creative energy. Salt represents matter, structure, form, embodiment, and stability. The alchemist seeks to bring these three principles into harmony, and when spirit, soul, and matter become balanced, transformation becomes possible. Like many esoteric traditions, alchemy incorporates the four classical elements. Fire represents transformation, purification, inspiration, and will. Water represents emotion, intuition, receptivity, and the unconscious. Air represents intellect, communication, thought, and understanding. Earth represents manifestation, stability, grounding, and physical reality. These elements are not merely physical substances, but fundamental forces operating within both nature and the human psyche. By the way, if any of you guys are new to pursuing high magic or ceremonial magic, the core subjects that you really need to master are all the correspondences between several different systems. First, I would study the elements. Master that. Master all of the deeper meanings. A lot of people don't realize how deeply ingrained they are in all systems, and it's really important to really understand that. Then I would look at alchemical stages, then psychology, and then I would get into some form of divination, and then also astrology is really good, and Kabbalah with the tree of life. It also has all of those systems have the exact same correspondences, but underneath it all is the elements. So definitely study that first. One of the most profound realizations within alchemy is that the laboratory is symbolic. The vessel is the practitioner. The fire is spiritual practice. The substance are aspects of consciousness. The transformation is internal. The gold is enlightenment. Once this realization occurs, the symbolism of alchemy becomes infinitely deeper. The alchemist begins to understand that every process described within alchemical text is also describing a process occurring within the soul. The 7 stages of alchemy, the processes of inner transformation. So while Kabbalah presents the tree of life as a map of consciousness, alchemy presents transformation as a process. The alchemists understood that spiritual growth does not occur all at once. Just as raw ore must be refined before becoming pure metal, the soul must undergo a series of transformations before reaching its highest potential. These transformations become known as the 7 stages of alchemy. Although often described as laboratory operations, they also represent psychological, spiritual, and initiatory processes that occur within every seeker who undertakes the great work. Together, these stages form a roadmap for the purification, integration, and perfection of consciousness. Calcination. Calcination is the first and often most difficult stage of alchemy. In the laboratory, calcination involves applying intense heat to a substance until impurities were burned away. Spiritually, calcination represents the destruction of the false self. It is the stage in which pride, ego, arrogance, attachments, illusions, and limiting beliefs begin to break apart. Life often initiates this stage through challenges, failures, disappointments, or experiences that force us to confront our weaknesses. The alchemists understood that transformation cannot begin until false structures are dismantled. Most of what we believe ourselves to be is based upon conditioning, social expectations, fears, and unconscious patterns. Calcination exposes these structures and reduces them to ashes. Although this stage can be uncomfortable, it is necessary because growth requires the dissolution of what is no longer authentic. The symbolic element associated with calcination is fire, and the color is often black, foreshadowing the stage known as nigredo. Dissolution. Once the rigid structures of the personality have been broken apart, the process of dissolution begins. In laboratory alchemy, dissolution involves placing the calcined material into liquid so that it can be dissolved and further purified. Spiritually, it represents surrender and the breakdown of emotional barriers. During this stage, unconscious material begins rising into awareness. Old wounds, buried emotions, fears, memories, and unresolved experiences often surface for healing. The practitioner begins to recognize that many aspects of identity are fluid rather than fixed. Emotional release frequently accompanies this phase as the individual learns to let go of rigid control and trust the transformative process. Dissolution teaches surrender. The ego cannot force transformation. Instead, it must allow itself to be carried by deeper currents of consciousness. And the symbolic element associated with dissolution is water, representing emotion, intuition, and the unconscious mind. Separation. Following dissolution comes separation. In laboratory work, the alchemists carefully separated the pure components from the impure. Spiritually, this stage involves discernment and self-examination. The practitioner begins distinguishing between authentic aspects of the self and those inherited through conditioning, fear, trauma, or social influence. Separation requires honesty and self-observation. The individual learns to identify patterns that support growth and patterns that hinder it. Beliefs are questioned, assumptions are examined, and the unconscious habits are brought into the awareness. This stage often resembles the process of spiritual discernment found in many mystical traditions. The alchemist learns that not everything within the psyche serves the great work. Some qualities must be strengthened, while others must be released. Separation develops clarity and wisdom by teaching the practitioner to distinguish truth from illusion. Conjunction. Conjunction represents the reunification of what has been purified through the previous stages. In laboratory alchemy, separated substances were recombined to form a more refined compound, and spiritually, conjunction symbolizes integration and balance. At this stage, previously opposing aspects of the self begin to work together harmoniously. Conscious and unconscious elements become more aligned. Masculine and feminine energies find balance. Intellect and intuition cooperate rather than compete. The fragmented personality gradually moves towards wholeness. Many alchemical texts symbolize conjunction through the sacred marriage of the Red King and the White Queen. This union represents the reconciliation of opposites and the creation of a new, more integrated consciousness. The practitioner begins to experience greater inner harmony and a deeper sense of purpose. Fermentation. Fermentation marks a profound turning point in the alchemical process. In laboratory practice, fermentation involved introducing a living agent that initiated transformation. Spiritually, fermentation represents the birth of a higher consciousness within the individual. The old identity has largely been dismantled, purified, and reorganized. Into this newly prepared vessel enters a fresh influx of spiritual awareness. Many traditions describe this stage as illumination, inspiration, awakening, or the descent of grace. The practitioner may experience moments of profound insight, mystical realization, or direct connection with something greater than themselves. Fermentation symbolizes spiritual rebirth. Just as fermentation transforms simple ingredients into something entirely new, the soul begins to awaken to dimensions of reality that were previously hidden. This stage often corresponds to experiences of revelation, inspiration, and renewed spiritual purpose. Distillation. Distillation is the process of refinement. In laboratory alchemy, repeated cycles of evaporation and condensation purified a substance to increasingly higher levels. Spiritually, distillation represents the ongoing purification of consciousness. Even after significant transformation has occurred, subtle impurities remain. The practitioner continues refining thoughts, emotions, motivations, and perceptions. Awareness becomes clearer, more stable, and less influenced by egoic distortions. Spiritual insight becomes integrated into daily life. Distillation teaches that awakening is not a final destination, but an ongoing process of refinement. The alchemist repeatedly returns to the work, polishing consciousness until greater clarity and wisdom emerge. This stage is often associated with the element of air because of its connection to purification, perception, and higher understanding. Coagulation. Coagulation is the final stage of the great work and represents the completion of the transformation. In laboratory alchemy, coagulation involved producing the final perfected substance. Spiritually, coagulation represents the embodiment of higher consciousness within ordinary life. The transformed self is no longer merely an experience or insight, but becomes a stable way of being. The wisdom gained through the previous stages becomes fully integrated into the personality. Spirit and matter, soul and body, inner and outer become united. The alchemists symbolize this stage through gold, the philosopher's stone, and the perfected human being. Coagulation does not mean escaping the world, but bringing spiritual realization into the world. The individual becomes a living expression of the transformation they have undergone, and this stage represents wholeness, integration, and the successful completion of the great work. Negredo, albedo, citrinitas, and rubedo. Running through the 7 stages are 4 major color phases that symbolize the progression of transformation. Negredo, the black stage, corresponds to death, dissolution, shadow work, and the breakdown of the old self. It is associated with calcination and the dark night of transformation. Albedo of the white stage represents purification, cleansing, insight, and the emergence of greater clarity. It follows the chaos of Negredo and signifies the beginning of renewal. Citrinitas, the yellow stage, symbolizes awakening, illumination, wisdom, and the dawning of higher consciousness. It represents the emergence of spiritual understanding and expanded awareness. Rubedo, the red stage, represents completion, integration, mastery, and the embodiment of spiritual realization. Rubedo is the culmination of the great work and the attainment of the philosopher's stone. These 4 color stages appear repeatedly throughout alchemical literature and serve as visual representations of the soul's journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The 7 stages as a spiritual map. The 7 stages of alchemy are not necessarily linear events that occur once and then end. Most practitioners move through them repeatedly throughout their lives. Each challenge, relationship, spiritual awakening, or major life transition may initiate a new cycle of alchemical transformation. The process spirals upward, and each cycle bringing greater awareness, integration, and then wisdom. And for this reason, alchemy remains one of the most profound maps of spiritual development ever created. It recognizes the transformation is not achieved through avoidance of difficulty, but through conscious engagement with it. Every challenge becomes fuel for growth. Every crisis becomes an opportunity for refinement. Every ending becomes the beginning of a new stage of development. The alchemist, therefore, comes to see life itself as the laboratory of the great work. The soul is the substance being transformed, consciousness is the vessel, experience is the fire, and enlightenment is the gold that gradually emerges through the process. Advanced alchemy, symbols, sacred marriage, planetary forces, and the great work. As students progress beyond the basic stages of alchemy, they discover that alchemical texts are filled with kings and queens, suns and moons, dragons and lions, marriages and deaths, mysterious substances, secret vessels, and cryptic imagery. To the untrained eye, these symbols appear confusing or even nonsensical. However, the alchemists deliberately concealed their teachings within symbolic language. This allowed spiritual truths to be preserved while also protecting them from misunderstanding or persecution. Once these symbols are understood, the deeper purpose of alchemy begins to emerge, and the entire tradition reveals itself as a map of consciousness, spiritual evolution, and the process of becoming whole. Magnum opus, the great work. At the center of all alchemy stands the magnum opus, or great work. This phrase refers to the complete process of transformation through which the fragmented human being is refined into a perfected expression of the soul. Every symbol, stage, operation, and mystery within alchemy ultimately points towards this goal. The alchemists believe that humanity exists in a state of division. The personality is fragmented by fear, conditioning, ignorance, emotional wounds, and attachment to illusion. The great work seeks to heal this fragmentation by bringing the various aspects of the self into harmony. The goal is not perfection in a moral sense, but wholeness in a spiritual sense. And the great work is therefore the process of becoming what truly is beneath all distortion and limitation. Many Western esoteric traditions later adopted the term great work to describe the entire path of spiritual awakening. Whether within Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, ceremonial magic, or mysticism, the great work came to represent the transformation of consciousness itself. The Red King and the White Queen. Among the most important symbols in alchemy are the Red King and the White Queen. These figures appear repeatedly in alchemical manuscripts and artwork. They represent opposing yet complementary forces within both nature and consciousness. The Red King symbolizes the masculine principle, activity, will, consciousness, solar energy, and sulfur. He represents structure, direction, power, and the outward expression of creative force. The White Queen symbolizes the feminine principle, receptivity, intuition, imagination, lunar energy, and Mercury. She represents fluidity, wisdom, reflection, and the inward dimensions of consciousness. The alchemist does not seek the dominance of one or over the other. Instead, the goal is balance and integration, and these two forces must be unified if transformation is to occur. The marriage of the king and queen symbolizes the reconciliation of opposites and the restoration of inner harmony. The union of the Red King and White Queen is known as the sacred marriage, or hieros gamos. This is one of the central mysteries of alchemy and appears in countless symbolic forms, mystical traditions worldwide. Spiritually, the sacred marriage represents the integration of consciousness and unconscious forces, intellect and intuition, masculine and feminine energies, spirit and matter. It is the realization that apparent opposites are not enemies but complementary aspects of a greater whole. The sacred marriage marks a significant stage in spiritual development because it signifies movement beyond inner conflict. The divided self begins to heal and the consciousness becomes increasingly unified. Many mystical traditions describe the process as the reconciliation of duality and the emergence of spiritual wholeness. The alchemical wedding. The sacred marriage reaches its fullest symbolic expression in what became known as the alchemical wedding. This theme became particularly important within Rosicrucian literature and Western esotericism. The alchemical wedding is not merely a symbolic ceremony, but represents the complete integration of all aspects of the self. The union of the king and the queen produce a new consciousness that transcends both. The resulting state is often represented by the divine child, the philosopher's stone, or the perfected human being. The wedding symbolizes the birth of a new level of awareness that emerges when all internal opposites have been reconciled. It represents spiritual rebirth and the successful advancement of the great work. The sun and the moon. Throughout alchemical symbolism, the sun and moon appear constantly. The sun represents consciousness, illumination, spirit, vitality, and the active principle of creation. It's associated with gold, enlightenment, and the fully realized self. The moon represents intuition, imagination, reflection, emotion, and the subconscious. It governs dreams, symbolism, psychic perception, and the hidden dimensions of experience. Just as the king and queen must be united, so too must the sun and moon. Spiritual development requires both conscious understanding and unconscious wisdom. Neither alone is sufficient. The alchemist seeks a balance in which the light of consciousness illuminates the depths of the unconscious while remaining receptive to its insights. Planetary alchemy. One of the most fascinating aspects of alchemy is the relationship with astrology. The alchemists believe that the planets represent archetypal forces operating throughout both nature and consciousness. Each planet corresponded to a metal and embodied specific psychological and spiritual qualities. Saturn was associated with lead and represented limitation, structure, karma, discipline, and the challenges that initiate transformation. Jupiter was associated with tin and represented expansion, wisdom, generosity, abundance, and growth. Mars was associated with iron and represented courage, strength, conflict, determination, and the power to overcome obstacles. The Sun was associated with gold and represented enlightenment, vitality, wholeness, and spiritual realization. Venus is associated with copper and represents beauty, love, harmony, attraction, and creativity. Mercury was associated with quicksilver and represents the intellect, communication, adaptability, and transformation itself. The moon was associated with silver and represents intuition, receptivity, imagination, and the unconscious. The alchemists saw these planetary forces as living principles operating within both the cosmos and the human soul. The colors of alchemy. Color symbolism plays a central role within alchemical teachings. The four major color phases describe the progression of consciousness through the great work. Black or negredo is death, dissolution, shadow work, confusion, and the breakdown of the old self. White or albedo represents purification, cleansing, clarity, and spiritual renewal. Yellow or citrinitas represents illumination, wisdom, awakening, and the dawning of higher consciousness. Red or rubedo represents completion, integration, mastery, and the embodiment of spiritual realization. These colors appear repeatedly within alchemical artwork and literature because they symbolize universal stages of transformation that every practitioner must encounter. One of the most debated questions in alchemy concerns whether the alchemists were attempting to transform physical substances or whether they were describing spiritual processes. The answer is likely both. Some alchemists genuinely pursued physical experimentation and contributed significantly to the development of chemistry and medicine. Others focused primarily upon spiritual transformation. Many viewed the outer laboratory and inner laboratory as reflections of one another. The laboratory processes served as a symbolic mirror of the transformations occurring within consciousness. By observing nature, the alchemists learned about the soul. By refining matter, the alchemists reflected upon the refinement of consciousness. Outer and inner transformation were understood as different expressions of the same universal process. Rosicrucian alchemy. During the 17th century, Rosicrucian incorporated many alchemical teachings into its spiritual philosophy. The Rosicrucians viewed alchemy primarily as the path of inner transformation rather than material transmutation. For the Rosicrucian initiate, the philosopher's stone symbolized spiritual illumination. The great work represented the purification of the soul and the awakening of higher consciousness. Alchemical imagery became a powerful symbolic language through which complex spiritual teachings could be transmitted. Many of the alchemical symbols still used in modern Western esotericism entered contemporary practice through Rosicrucian teachings. Alchemy and ceremonial magic. As Western esoteric traditions evolved, alchemy became deeply integrated with ceremonial magic. Practitioners recognized that both systems sought the same goal: transformation of consciousness. Ceremonial magicians often interpret alchemical symbolism as a description of initiatory development. Rituals become alchemical operations. Invocations become acts of purification. Meditation becomes a process of distillation, and spiritual awakening becomes the emergence of the philosopher's stone. For many high magicians, alchemy provides the psychological and philosophical framework that explains why magical practices work and what they are ultimately intended to accomplish. Jung and psychological alchemy. In the 20th century, Swiss psychologist Carl Jung brought renewed attention to alchemy by interpreting its symbols as expressions of the unconscious mind. Jung believed that alchemical imagery described the process of individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. He viewed the philosopher's stone as the symbol of psychological wholeness and the great work as a description of inner development. Although Jung approached alchemy through psychology rather than mysticism, his work helped many modern students recognize the profound psychological insights hidden within alchemical symbolism. Modern practitioners engage with alchemy in many different ways. Some study its symbolism and philosophy. Others incorporate meditation, journaling, ritual, contemplation, dream work, and self-observation into their practice. Many use the 7 stages of alchemy as a framework for understanding personal growth and transformation. An individual experiencing major life challenges may recognize themselves within Negredo. Someone emerging from a period of healing may identify with Albedo. A spiritual awakening may correspond to Citrinitas, while deep integration and maturity may reflect Rubedo. Through this lens, alchemy becomes a practical tool for understanding the cycles of transformation occurring throughout life. Like Kabbalah, alchemy was never intended to be merely an intellectual pursuit. It was designed to be lived. The symbols served as guides, the stages serve as landmarks, and the great work serves as the destination. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for refinement. Every failure becomes fuel for growth. Every transformation becomes part of the unfolding process. The alchemist learns to view life itself as a laboratory. Relationships become vessels for transformation. Difficulties become opportunities for purification. Successes become opportunities for integration. The entire human experience becomes part of the great work. The ultimate goal of alchemy. When viewed from its highest perspective, alchemy is not about gold, chemistry, or secret formulas. Its ultimate purpose is the transformation of consciousness. The lead that must be transformed is the unrefined self. The fire is the spiritual practice. The vessel is the soul. The philosopher's stone is enlightenment. The gold is wisdom embodied. The alchemist begins by studying symbols and processes, and over time they discover that every symbol describes something within themselves. The laboratory becomes consciousness. The great work becomes life itself. What first appeared to be a mysterious system of coded teachings gradually reveals itself to be one of humanity's most profound maps of spiritual transformation. And for this reason, alchemy remains one of the foundational pillars of Western esotericism. It offers a complete vision of human development, showing how the fragmented self may be purified, integrated, awakened, and ultimately transformed into a living expression of its highest potential. The great work is not simply something the alchemist performs. It is the process through which the soul remembers what it has always been. Okay, you guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. I really wanted to cover alchemy in depth after I did that series on Kabbalah because they are so tied in together, and you can't have one without the other. So at some point on your spiritual path, you will have to deal with the psychology of you. And the alchemical stages really describe how that is done on a psychological level when you make the unconscious conscious. You start to expand your awareness, you start to do shadow work. All of these things are part of the deeper spiritual path. And so I really wanted to cover alchemy in this way so that I could give you examples of how that's done and how it applies to ceremonial magic or any spiritual path that you are on. Okay, you guys, I know this one was long. Thank you for sticking around. I'm going to be doing the Arbitel, and I've added in the Almadel. And then the Picatrix, Key of Solomon, the Kabbalion, Hermeticism, and then I've had a subscriber request to do some more comparison videos on secret orders. So that is all coming up. I appreciate each and every one of you guys, and I will see you next time. Bye.